how do we get a digital infrastructure sales strategy going that helps how to get a digital infrastructure appointment meeting playbook going for the sales team? So how do we get digital infrastructure appointments and meetings for the sales team? I think it starts with figuring out where your particular company is and its life cycle and in relative maturity. In other words, do you know exactly who your ideal clients are? Do you know the products and services, the digital infrastructure products and services that they purchase from your company? Do you know the price points at which those infrastructure products and services are purchased at? How long a typical sales cycle is? How long the duration is? Do you know your basic unit economics? In other words, does your company have product market fit, PMF, so that you know exactly who the right people are, what they buy, the price points, and how frequently they purchase? And do you also have go-to-market fit? Do you know if you pour more jet fuel into your rocket, do you know that it's going to be able to carry successfully from founder-led to sales-led to larger sales teams to directors to managers, vice presidents, and scaling your sales team from a few people to a few dozen to eventually to a few hundred? If you have answers to at least some of those questions, you can deploy a strategy for getting more appointments and more meetings with much more precision. Usually, for most companies, the best place to start is where you've been most successful in selling and servicing digital infrastructure. And if you're keeping up with best practices to stay competitive in the marketplace, usually the first place that there would be evidence of this is by going to your website and looking at your case studies that are up on your website. Where have you been most successful? And in an ideal scenario, you'll have one or more clusters of companies in that section of your website who have a lot in common. If they're all over the place, if there's no rhyme or reason with the companies that you've been selling digital infrastructure to and servicing digital infrastructure, if there's nothing consistent about what brings them all together, it's a lot more difficult. However, if you do find that there's commonalities, you're on your way to developing an ideal client profile, what's often abbreviated as an ICP. An ICP tells you in a very concise, single page kind of definition that should fit on like one page in a Google Doc or Word doc or something like that. And it should be able to identify the geographic region that your ideal client is located in. Is it just your regional area? Is it your whole country? Is it your whole continent? Is it the whole globe? Where have you been most successful geographically? Second, it likely has a company size parameter with that as well. And when we think of company size, think of Goldilocks. What's too big? What's too small? What's just right? And a lot of times when people are just starting out an exercise like this, they're tempted to say, who's the ideal client? Everyone. Well, if it's everyone, it's no one. So we need to be more specific and identify at least what a prospect that's too small looks like and what a prospect that's too large looks like, and be realistic, self-aware about where our company does best. So we've nailed down the location, the geography. We've nailed down the company size, which if we're using a database like LinkedIn, company size is probably going to be defined in terms of number of employees. And then we need to understand their industry or their business model where we've been most successful. And where this is especially relevant is because regardless of whether you're looking at geographic coverage or whether you're looking at industries, certain regulatory things, certain compliance issues come up with certain kinds of companies and certain kinds of locations when it comes to digital infrastructure. So we need to know what your company is actually really good at selling and servicing, and back into how we're going to build a plan to get more companies like that into your sales pipeline. So we've defined the ideal client profile. Next, we need to understand in these companies, who is the most important kind of person that we need to be building a relationship with. This would be, if we think about an ideal client profile defines what you're trying to do at a company level. Buyer personas define who you're trying to build relationships with at an individual level. And they usually, what a buyer persona has in common is it's not just job titles, it's not just job functions. It's a collection, it's an amalgamation of a kind of a cluster of people that all have similar goals and all have similar challenges that they're trying to address. The way you figure out what these goals and challenges are is by doing actual research, not just pulling it out of thin air. And some of this research, a small portion of this research, can involve talking to stakeholders within your company, like on your sales team, on your account management team, on your marketing team, on your executive team. However, I'd caution you that internal research and their internal assumptions of what they see in the marketplace should maybe be about 20-25% of your overall research for putting together buyer personas. The majority of it, 75-80% or more, should come from actual research with the external stakeholders that are most similar to these ideal clients. So in a perfect scenario, you're going to do interviews face to face. The second best scenario is on video conference or Zoom or something like that. If you don't have the ability to do those direct interviews, usually the next best thing is looking at how they self-describe and what kinds of content that they share when it comes to like social. So looking at a basket of 10 or 20 representative people and looking at how they describe themselves on their LinkedIn profile, the kind of content that they share, what kind of conferences they go to, what kind of publications they read, common skills endorsements. And then you can take those same people and go and do a search, like a Google search or ChatGPT search or something like that. And in a perfect scenario, we're not just ingesting information about blog posts they've written or news releases they've been quoted in or articles they've been quoted in. In an ideal scenario, we're finding like podcasts and YouTube videos of conferences they've spoken at or webinars they've presented at. So not only can we hear how they've described their biggest goals and their biggest challenges, we can get intonation and body language and all the subtleties that the next best thing to actually doing these interviews. So by bringing that all together and looking for the commonalities, you'll arrive at a primary buyer persona, the most important economic stakeholder in these companies that you want to build relationships with. And then we need to be realistic enough that for significantly sized digital infrastructure opportunities, there's usually more than one person on the decision committee. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a committee, right? So who else is on the decision committee that has a different kind of role and different kinds of interests, but it's still incredibly important the next most important stakeholder that has to weigh in on digital infrastructure. Some cases, maybe it's a CFO or something like that. It's going to vary depending on the nature of your business, but rest assured, what distinguishes that person as a separate buyer persona is because they have different goals and they have different challenges. And once you understand your most important and second most important kind of stakeholder in these ideal client accounts, you can not only go about building your target account list of the right kinds of companies, you can go about starting to build reach with the right kinds of people in these companies. And when we show up, we're not going to go knock, knock, knock. Let's book a demo. Let's book a sales meeting. Let me come in and pitch. No. Maybe 10 or 20 years ago, you could get away with that selfish nonsense, but it doesn't work like that anymore. Because in the world that we live in today, most of the researching and the comparing options and evaluating pricing happens before you get to meet a prospect, before they're willing to talk with someone from your sales team. The latest research from Gartner found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey, researching, comparing options, and evaluating pricing, now happens before sales contact. And that is a huge difference compared to as recently as 10 years ago, when CEB, the corporate executive board that has subsequently been acquired by Gartner, first did this kind of research with Sirius Decisions and Salesforce and found at that time about 56% of a typical journey was over before sales contact. So going back about 10 years ago, your sales team got to spend about half of the sales cycle, about half of the buyer's journey with their prospects. Now they're only spending about 15 or 17% of that buyer's journey with prospects. So you're actually excluded from this process way more than you're included. And typically the only way that you're going to get included is to have your sales team show up as something other than salespeople that are just focused on closing a transaction. So your sales team needs a radical makeover and a repositioning so that they're able to show up as teachers, as consultants, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors, and perhaps they even are able to elevate to the level of being seen as thought leaders. And for the more junior members on your team, when it comes to sales appointments and meetings, obviously they're not going to show up year one as a thought leader. But what they can do is they can be a really good student of your company's thought leadership that's created by bringing together the most brilliant minds in your company and creating this amazing content and this amazing events experiences that get at exactly the biggest goals and the biggest challenges that are consistently brought up by your most important buyer personas. And when you have your more seasoned, more veteran talent on your team creating these assets, then even the more junior members of your team should be attending those webinars and participating and helping to moderate those webinars and reading and watching all of those assets so they can be the most amazing concierge and tour guide to direct prospects in the direction of the most appropriate resource so that they're able to diagnose before they are able to prescribe. So when it comes to getting digital infrastructure appointments and meetings for the sales team, it's super important to recognize that we no longer live in a world where your sales team is going to be invited in on a regular guest if they're not adding a ton of value to this process. And the way that your sales team is able to add value to the process is they can't be perceived as wanting to just close a transaction anymore. They need to come in looking a lot more like a big four consultant, like a $500 or $1,000 an hour consultant that would work for like KPMG or EY or Deloitte or PwC. It's that kind of vibe, that kind of aura. And when you're able to do that, it has a game-changing impact so that you're not chasing prospects for appointments and meetings. And I suspect that the way that this question is phrased, that there's some big culture changes that need to happen in your company starting from the top down level. Your CEO, your CRO, your head of your VP of sales, your VP of marketing product, everyone needs to be bought into the vision of your company being seen as the go-to experts in your space. If you don't have that passion for your company to be seen as the go-to experts in your space, none of this is going to work. And you're going to be banging your head against the wall, looking for an increasingly tiny sliver of the market that buys the way they did 20 years ago. The reality is, for any one of your clients that has a smartphone, that has figured out search engines, that's figured out Copilot and ChatGPT, that understands what LinkedIn is, that understands what webinars and podcasts and YouTube and review websites are, McKinsey found 70 to 80% of decision makers now prefer a digital journey. There's only so much that you can do to bang your head against the wall and try to convince yourself that your internal champions of digital infrastructure are digital laggards. It sounds ridiculous when I say that out loud, right? You think your internal champions are going to be the edge cases that never got a smartphone, that never figured out YouTube, that don't watch podcasts, listen to webinars, go to review websites. You think your prospects are the edge cases? If you really believe that, we have bigger issues about limiting beliefs here. But if you truly take the time to build out your buyer personas, you'll get a tremendous amount of precision on what they need to learn from you to help them close the gap with their goals at an individual level, at a team level, at a company level, and close the gap with their biggest challenges that are stressing them out to no end, that are causing them to have to pull all-nighters and take time away from their friends, family, and loved ones, miss out on vacations and all these other things that are causing them immense amounts of professional stress. And the better job you can do with creating remarkable resources that help them educate and build trust along the way with them, the much better empowered your sales team is going to have much more effective appointments, to have much more effective meetings that begin relationships with where prospects are. Not where you'd like them to be a couple weeks or a couple months down the road, but where they actually are today. So the goal, 28 touch points between complete stranger and closed one new customer. So the question is, how many of those touch points are you successfully having a relationships with today? Do you truly have a good presence in awareness and consideration and decision? Or are you only showing up for decision? It's kind of like, everyone always tells me I use too many baseball analogies. So I'll give the baseball analogy and then I'll give the football analogy so it translates a little bit better outside the US. So imagine you're taking your clients to a baseball game. And for whatever reason, the stadium is incredibly hostile towards people that have the word sales on their business card, email signature, or LinkedIn profile. So you're not allowed in the stadium until the bottom of the eighth inning, despite the fact that you bought the tickets, right? Sounds a little far-fetched, but that's kind of what's going on in the world we live in today. People are so much more sales resistant and sales allergic. And if you're in if you're in Europe, if you're in Latin America, wherever, and you're taking them to a football match, imagine it's deep into the third or fourth quarter, deep into the third or fourth period before you're allowed into the stadium to sit with the clients and prospects that you brought to that game. That's what's going on. And the only way that we can get back into that journey to have a great relationship with them is to radically make over our sales team so that they're seen as consultants, teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders. That's how you get digital infrastructure appointments and meetings for the sales team that actually help, as opposed to doing things that irritate your prospects and send them running for the hills. So, do you want to help them or do you want to chase your prospects away? Ultimately, the choice is yours, but these are company culture changes, and most of the time they have to start from the top down.